mysteries of creation are there. In the sky. Up in the sky. The moon and the planets are there. And new hopes for knowledge and peace are there.
Welcome to your Inner Journey weather report for the week of February 28th through March 7th, in which we utilize archetypal astrology to help you understand the energies in the collective and to gain some sense of anticipation of energies that might come up in our inner journeys this week. And why inner journeys? Inner journeys such as psychedelic journeys, meditation sessions, yoga sessions, hypnosis, dreamwork, ceremonies, vision quests. These are times when we turn the senses inwards to understand to understand and get in touch with what is actually happening here in what we perceive as reality. What is at the foundation of our perception of reality. And inner journeys is a bit of a misnomer in the sense that there's a kind of a preconception implicit in the word inner journey, that there's outside world and there's inside world. The outside world is the world that we see when we open our senses or open our eyes, we look outside, and the inner world is what we feel within about what we observe in the outside world. And we're not in control of what happens in the outside world, and to some extent we're not in control of what we can feel on the inside, but we can make decisions coming from our inner world that gives us a sense of being able to control our life, which we tend to define as something that is separate from the larger outer world. And so inner journeys is actually an opportunity. There's another way we could say inner journeys is actually, we could say, rather than inner and outer, imposing a division of inner and outer, we could say depth versus superficiality. And superficiality would be taking everything at face value, that there is that the external world is external. I'm an organic being, and my life is just limited to what's inside my body. And everything that I experience outside, every person I meet, every situation that arises, everything that I observe outside is external to me, separate from me. And that's the way it looks, on the surface of things. That's the way reality looks. It looks as if consciousness is inside my head. What I can call my own life really is just limited to what I experience inside my body. And then externally, the people that I meet and the things that happen, it's easy from a more of a kind of a scientific paradigm to say that what happens outside of me is not really having anything to do with my life. Because if it does have meaning to me, it's meaning that I place on it coming from my own psychology and my own biochemistry inside my own head, inside my own body. But otherwise, it doesn't have anything to do with me. So that's a way of looking at reality just by a kind of a surface level examination of reality. And so inner experience is actually depth experience of really stopping, pausing, taking time, and placing some of our energy on really observing what is actually happening. What is actually happening? What is this thing called reality? What is happening here? I know it looks like I'm this separate being. I'm born. I don't know where I was before I was born, and I don't know where I go after I die. And again, outer world separate. Everything's very separate. Depth experience is taking the time to examine what is perception. What is the act of perception? What is the act of existence? What is the process of existence? What even is existence? What's consciousness? And so when we settle into a depth examination of those things, then life starts to become very interesting, because we begin to uncover something that is quite marvelous, in the sense that everything that I perceive of the outer world has to be translated through my body and through my senses. So basically, everything that I perceive that there's an outer world out there, but everything that I perceive as an outer world it has to be taken through the medium of my body, through sensations, through my senses, hearing and seeing. And so it has to be taken in. There's nothing actually independent out there that does not get filtered through my senses and my experience. And when something gets filtered through my senses and my experience, it gets a definition placed on it, gets a judgment placed on it, it gets a kind of a storyline placed on it. And so the entire outer world is actually a process of perception more than a hard and fast kind of objective thing outside. And so things start to become very interesting when we have this depth of connection to our experience, because we realize that there's nothing outside that is inherently bad. There's nothing outside that's inherently good. Those things come later. They come later through the act of perception, and they are actually, if I slow down my act of perception, there's something that I assign to experience, which is actually very empowering. It may sound disempowering, because then it's like, oh, well, I can't just blame things that happen outside for my experience. But it's actually very empowering, because there's nothing, and similarly, there's nothing outside that's going to give me peace. There's nothing outside that is going to be a source of permanent joy for me, because the act of perception is the act of change. Basically, when something meets our senses, we're acknowledging that there's change, there's fluctuations in perception, and then we assign things to it. We assign good, bad. And so in the old Buddhist texts of the Theravada tradition, and possibly also the Mahayana tradition, the chain of causation that is given purportedly by the Buddha for how the world comes into existence. It's not just incarnation. It's not just how a person incarnates, but it's how the entire, what they call samsara, the realm of experience, comes into reality, is a chain of causation, of dependent causation, in which consciousness and the objects, the consciousness, the senses, and the objects that touch the senses all arise together. They arise together. They're co-originating together. And so again, from a superficial perspective, it looks like there's a world that keeps on going, and there's history, and there's the past, and there's just this kind of timeline, linear timeline that goes from, the past to the future. And then we get born on that. We as individuals get born on that, and we pop into existence. Then eventually we die, we pop out of existence. That whole thing just keeps on going. Though if we look at the act of consciousness, perception, and we understand that origination of how the act of perception, the senses, and the external realm that gets perceived arise together, then it looks more like, and the entire universe actually is born with us. When we are born, there is actually it's as if the universe itself gets born. And then that would point some interesting kind of indicators towards sense that we are actually that which we perceive, the stars, the sky, the universe, life. We are that. We are that has come into incarnation, not just as a separate body, but the whole process, the body encased, embedded in the larger picture. All of that is life perceiving itself through the vehicle of our body, of our senses, of an identity that gets constructed. And so that's inner journeys. Why inner journeys? Why inner journeys are important? They're really just, again, using that change of wording. They're actually depth experiences versus superficial experiences. So rather than inner and outer, depth versus surface. And Why archetypal astrology? Why utilize archetypal astrology to gain insight into depth experience? Because the discovery of archetypal astrology that came out, archetypal astrology is a branch on the larger tradition, ages old tradition of astrology, and that branch came off and was developed through the work of Dr. Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas in the field of psychedelic therapy. And they discovered that in their, at least in their kind of perspective, the universe, not only is there a sense that the universe embodies, comes into embodiment as a person that's perceiving an inner and outer, but it actually also is intelligent, not just internally. We have intelligence, we make decisions, but it is intelligent externally. So the outer universe that we perceive also has an intelligence to it. And that intelligence we can decipher, it can speak to us in something called astrological charts, for instance, astrological birth chart. That is a picture of the sky when you were born. And the picture of the sky when you were born is a reflection of your coremost nature. So the furthest things that we can see, that we can perceive, are a reflection of our depths within ourselves. That chart, that astrological birth chart, is like a map. It's like a map that talks to us and guides us, and it's a reflection of our innermost nature. So it's the external universe providing a map to our innermost nature and guiding us, but because it's our innermost nature, it's actually ourselves guiding us, and it's the external universe, and we are the universe taken form. We are life taken form. So it creates a kind of a feedback loop of intelligence, guidance, and that is we can use that to understand the life and the nature of an individual, and then we can also use it to understand a window of time through something called transits, to understand, what energies are up this week, what energies are up in the collective, what energies are up for you in your personally this year, next 2 years, what energies were up that time 10 years ago. It can help us understand something that happened in our past. So with that, we're going to look at the energies this week. And here we go. This is Archetypal Explorer. And Archetypal Explorer is a great program for helping us see what energies are up during any window of time. So I have this week up here. This is the 28th through March 7th, February 28th through March 7th. And the big alignment that's here at the top, which means it's exact, is Mercury conjunct Jupiter. So it's there all week, but it really peaks as we get towards the end of the week. And we can read about it here. The transit qualities, the positive transit qualities, supportive, rewarding qualities, ease of speaking, reading widely, travel, gaining a larger perspective. Challenges can be excessive talking, proneness to generalities or exaggeration, too many words. So Mercury conjunct Jupiter, a wonderful transit happening as we get towards later in the week. How can that energy, this is a world transit, this is energy in the collective, but how can it still help us in our inner journeys? It can help us because the Mercury conjunct Jupiter combination is good for gaining the larger picture, the insight that plugs all the pieces together. It's like putting that last vital piece to the puzzle and then seeing what the illustration is. Mercury has to do with the mind, perceiving, thinking, speaking, and Jupiter has to do with the larger inclusive wholes. So it takes things and brings it into a larger inclusive whole. So we get the mountaintop view, we get the broader perspective, the aha moment where the whole, all the disparate parts fit together and make sense. Very good for inner journeys. That can happen in the outer world in terms of, communication about travel. Jupiter has to do with travel, Mercury's communication, kind of big downloads of information. And this is a world transit. So you can use Archetypal Explorer also to look at your personal transits this week. So for instance, I pulled mine up. So what's interesting for mine is that in the larger collective, there is Mercury conjoined Jupiter, but for me personally, it's Mercury opposite Saturn. And it's a different energy. That's a different energy. So we can read about it here. Transit qualities: positive, good mental organization, realistic outlook, precision in speaking and writing. challenges or difficulty in communications, mental rigidity, pessimistic outlook. Okay, so it's nice that I know this because one, if I have, for instance, pessimistic outlook come up, I realize, oh, okay, this is just the energy of the transit. It's actually wanting to go towards good mental organization, realistic outlook, precision in speaking and writing. So why don't I apply my mind and then I begin to reap those positive qualities? It's also nice to know these two, the world transit and the personal transit, because the two energies complement each other. Actually, Mercury opposite Saturn is a kind of honing things down and narrowing things in terms of my communication, thinking, writing. And Mercury Jupiter, which is the larger world transit, is actually blowing things up and gaining the larger perspective. So the two are a nice complement to each other. So that's nice. And I get to know that by looking at these transits. So thank you for being with me here today. I really appreciate your being with me here today. And I wish you all the success and the fruition on your inner journeys, your depth journeys, your understanding of yourself, know thyself, because that is how we as individuals come into our fullness of our being. We let go of fear and we become our fullness of our being. And that is how we also do the same as an entire race, because we see and we understand, we take responsibility for actions. We understand that the joy of life is within us. It's not contingent on things outside of us. And life is a process of being here and giving, not worrying about what happens. Okay, so thank you so much for being with me here today. And I'll see you next week. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll be happy to address them next week.